the great thing about Bootstrap is that the buttons are already pre-defined. So you can, just as you were looking at the different columns, you've got a whole bunch of options for buttons when it comes to Bootstrap. Go to the Bootstrap site and you're looking at buttons, so CSS, and then the hashtag buttons. You see that by default we have 6 different types of buttons, so we can call to any one of these classes, and in order to set up a button, all we have to do is add the class button. Buttons are really easy to add. You can add it to any element that you're using, so if you're using a div, you can add it as they show you here in this example. If you're using actual button, you can add it within there as well, and even with links. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this link into a button. So what we're going to do, open up our code, add in a class to this link, and we're just going to do btn. So that's for button, and as you can see within the drop down there was quite a few other options there for buttons. And when I refresh the page, we see that we do have a button style on here. Next, we're going to select the type of button that we want to do. So we're going to do a blue button with white text. So now all we have to do is that we've already set a class of button, so Bootstrap knows to function that area like a button. So if you see that whenever we hover over it, we do get some different kind of styling there, and that's all we have to do to turn a link into a button. So it's really easy to do, and you could literally pick out whatever style you want. Just type in btn. So you've got an option here of success, you've got a default, info, warning, danger, as well as a link. So here I believe this just turns it back into a link, so you wouldn't really necessarily need to do that if you've already got a hyperlink. But if you are using a button and you want to turn it into a link, you can do it this way as well. And then there's also some options for button sizes. So if I wanted to really highlight this button and I want this button to really stick out, I'm going to do button large. So when I go back to my page, you'll see that it's so easy to just make them large, to style them, to color them, and there's all these different options as well. You can also do a button block, and what this is going to do, this is going to create, so if you've got more than one button, you can use it within a button block, as well as you can preset it, the state of the button, so you could already have it active. You could anchor an element to it as well. So here it's just active, and you can also disable it, so you could disable buttons as well. So it's really easy once again to do. This one probably isn't the best example of being disabling a button, because the button type is already there, so they're putting it there. But you also have the option to do disabled within the button class. So here we've got a link here, and we're just going to disable that button, so that also is going to disable that link, so we can no longer click it. So bringing that back, we can just remove that and refresh the page, go back out to the page, and we see that now we're able to access this button, and it does completely act like a button. So there are a bunch of examples here. So again, it is worthwhile looking through if you are working with buttons, and there's a whole bunch of examples here that you can use. Typing in with, I do see that I do have a drop down for a bunch of options here for buttons. If I can get that to show up again. So when you are creating buttons, you do get these drop down. So now I just had it show up again, and now it just disappeared again on me. So this is just something that we can see here that we do have a whole bunch of options for buttons, button sizes, the button info. So those are just different styling classes, and it makes it just look different. So when you are working with buttons, actually there are a few really good tools online, and one of my favorite ones is from PLU Go Labs, and they have a button generator. So this is really cool because it actually allows you to add in all these glyphicons as well, glyphicons, and you can really make really cool buttons. So make a button, and you can see here in the preview on the right hand side, it's actually showing you what the button's going to look like. So if I want a default size, if I want a large one, if I want a mini one, whatever I want, and then here we can go through all the different colors. So this is great if you're trying to style out your button, you want to see what it's going to look like. So you want to make a red button, and again, this is only going to be red within the default styling of Bootstrap. If you're using another theme color, your buttons are going to be different. You go to something like Boots Watch, you can see that right on the main page there, you can see that all these different themes have different color buttons. And although you're still accessing the same way, you've got the default primary success info warning danger. You're going to be able to note that these 6 default classes for buttons are also going to be used for styling other elements within Bootstrap as well. And depending on whatever theme you've picked, so Space Lab is a little bit brighter. Some of these are completely different as to what you have on the default Bootstrap. So here, if you go to Journal Style and you go Preview, you can see that their buttons are going to be a lot different than the default Bootstrap buttons. And even if you're using a generator, you got to be mindful that these default will now be gray instead of white, and so on. So this one will be yellow, warning will be yellow, it will no longer be orange. So just keep that in mind when you are designing buttons on these button generators, because your CSS, if you're using a theme or if you're using a specific color set for your Bootstrap layout, it's going to be different than what you're going to see within this preview area. So here, but it is going to match up to whatever the danger is. It's going to match up to whatever danger is within here. So if we had this theme, for example, danger over here in journal would be orange, it would no longer be red. So within the button, you've got availability to generate button type. So these are all the different types of buttons that you can have. As well, you can use buttons and divs, you can use buttons wherever you want to use buttons. As long as you're attaching that class, that particular element is going to function as a button. So here they've got 4 different button types. Probably the most common way of doing buttons. Of course, you could also do a div and have that div listen to it within JavaScript or jQuery on click, and then button functionality work within that format. So the whole idea of buttons is that they're clickable, and Bootstrap really makes them fun to click. So here we have active, so this is the same thing that we were looking at before, where it's setting the default state, and then here we have disabled, so what we had looked at before. So by default it's none. Also we've got a width, so we've got ability to change the auto width, so it changes the button to a block style. So kind of like what we were looking at over here, button block takes up the entire width, and by default it's just auto, so it's gonna add some padding around the text and make it within this size. So large is gonna have more padding, larger font, so on. You also have the ability within this generator to add an icon. So if you want to remove the icon altogether, you can just X that. If you want to have an icon, which really does make the buttons a lot more attractive to have that icon. So you can pick any one of these default icons that are available within Bootstrap. So again, this makes Bootstrap really functional and cool. And you can also adjust the icon position. So if you wanted the icon on the right or the left, and you can see here within the HTML code all that this is doing. So we've set it here on the right hand side, we've set the button, and you can see that this code here is going to be what our output is going to be. So depending on what glyphicon we're picking is going to set that just as a class. So it's already outside of that external, and this is just standard code within Bootstrap. to set these icons. We're going to also look at that in the next lesson as well. But this again, standard code to set the icons. And here is just the regular text between the H tags. So if you do a button, it's slightly different, but again, the same type of idea where you've got a button tag for HTML and you've got the content in the middle and you've got the make a button. So submit doesn't have options for the icon for obvious reasons, because you're setting a value of the input, and the same with input. So those standard form buttons don't have options for the icon. So again, keeping that in mind, if you do want to have an icon, you might have to use some JavaScript or some additional functionality built in order to get a form to submit if you wanted to have that icon on the form. Well, and it is a great site to kind of play around and get a better feel of what you can do with buttons.